So let's get to the topic at hand and explain why Rudy cheated on his shiny Bulbasaur with Squirtle. I'm sure after the last episode, both have earned their respective nicknames. Now, the first blow that deeply hit and hurt Rudy was obviously the loss of his father, something that came so suddenly and unexpectedly from Rudy's perspective that he was completely surprised by it all. Rudy felt completely empty and numb when he realized that his father had been torn in two by the Hydra. But despite this enormous shock and the ensuing grief, Rudy was still able to bear it, even if just barely. Rudy was still able to function. He carried through and did not collapse in the labyrinth. He was not alone and had the whole team behind him at that time, and he still had to take care of Zenith as he had promised his father. So despite the fact that Rudy was already severely shaken, he still functioned, for now. But after Zenith woke up, after sleeping for 4 days, Rudy was finally at his breaking point. Knowing that Zenith had not made it whole out of the labyrinth, he fell into extreme grief and a sort of numb state, just like before when he was left by Eris. He could no longer think clearly and was completely traumatized. The realization that not only his father had died, but also that he couldn't keep his promise to get Zenith out of the labyrinth safe and sound, broke him. The mere thought of having to explain all this to Norn was too much for him to handle. It was so overwhelming that he could hardly think straight, especially since he felt sorry for not being the true son of Zenith and Paul, and realizing that he truly loved both of them regardless. On top of that, Rudy had survivor's guilt since he felt like a failure once more, and that Paul's sacrifice was ill spent on him, on a fake son like him. Also, the rest of his team barely noticed how badly Rudy was doing and how his condition continued to deteriorate, because they knew him only as this strong, cool-headed prodigy who was in control of himself, and because they hit themselves quite hard. Only Roxy was aware of his more vulnerable side. This is why Roxy tried to cheer him up. Rudy, now at an extreme low point, couldn't help but betray his wife, who, as mentioned, was pregnant at this time, and cheat on her with Roxy. Just like Sylphie cured his bent lance syndrome, in this somewhat similar situation, he wanted nothing more than comfort, love, and a way to deal with his emotional turmoil. However, it must be said that Roxy Magurdia was not innocent in this either. She knew exactly what she was doing. First of all, she was a bit older than Rudy, and secondly, she saw in him her dream man that she wanted to be together with. A young, brave adventurer who saved her from a desperate situation in a labyrinth. It was exactly how Roxy always wished to meet her dream man. And the invitation to another labyrinth, albeit a simpler one where only the two of them would go in, was a rather unsubtle date. Rudy's father had also noticed that Roxy had an interest in Rudy and his magic staff. So when Roxy asked Rudy out on a date, she was also nervous, and literally made a move on him by using his back for support. The way she pronounced his name and her tone said it all. It was the most blatant advance outside of any R-rated doujinshi about the two. And therefore, basically during the whole time, but especially once Rudy reached his low point, it was Roxy who initiated the act, to put it very YouTube-friendly, to comfort Rudy and be close to him. So to summarize this part, Rudy was at an emotional low point, and just like Sylphie cured his broken spear syndrome, it was Roxy who pulled him out of his emotional hole by offering him another one. But Roxy did it also for a very selfish reason. She wanted him because he was her dream man, and she saw an opportunity during his vulnerability that she exploited. And it gets worse, for this video title is not clickbait. And no matter what you think you have seen in the anime and what you think about Rudy, spoiler alert, it gets worse. Because the anime left something out which will become important later. And now, about the quality of the act, to put it again in a very YouTube-friendly way, Rudy was rather uncontrolled and rough with Roxy. His trauma and emotional pain were more or less taken out on her and passed on to her. So it was not the sweet and soft lovemaking you might expect from Rudy's current body, but more from his old one. This is something Rudy later also felt guilty about. And as random as it may seem to mention this at the end, it's an important point. In his past life, Rudy was a real jerk and not exactly stable due to his trauma. That's why he, back in his old life, preferred to stay home and strangle the snake rather than attend his own parents' funeral and memorial service. He used this self-intimacy in order to deal with his trauma, which is a dangerous coping mechanism. And I know back in his old life he never physically harmed anyone, but that's not because he was such a good boy. but because he didn't have the strength, power, or means to cause much harm. Other than living off others for more than a decade and being inconsiderate, he didn't cause much in the way of pain and suffering. But not because he didn't have it in himself to cause harm, but because he couldn't. But now Rudy is strong. He can defeat swordsmen like Luke with a makeshift weapon, and his potent magic and enormous mana reserve make him closer to a force of nature in a fence. Just a reminder, but this man can throw nukes. And he has become a dragon slayer almost single-handedly, and with that, he is now capable of causing far more harm and being far crueler to women than he could have been in his past life. So Rudy's roughness with Roxy is a foreshadowing of a very dark chapter that awaits us later in the story. Probably the end of Season 3 or even Season 4. As I said, there is really a lot more to cover in this direction. Finally, shout out to Alina Lise, the best grandma anyone can wish for if the wish is to encourage the former teacher of your husband, with whom he cheated to cope with mental distress, to marry her so that she could be happy, even if her own granddaughter will cry. To be clear, Elena Lise was a driving force behind all of this in the novels as well. And finally, on a more lighter note, some real-life politics. Rudy not only wielding nuclear power but marrying his former teacher makes him the Emmanuel Macron of anime. And now it is your turn. What do you think about Rudy cheating on his pregnant wife Sylphie with his former teacher who took advantage of his emotional turmoil? Can you understand it? Would you have done the same? Let me know down in the comments section. Okay, bye.